He was known as the Pharaoh of Egypt. Today, former President Hosni Mubarak appeared more like a slave. It was the first time a modern-day leader in the Middle East has been put on trial by his own people. Mr. Mubarak lay on a stretcher in a cage in a Cairo courtroom to face charges of corruption and ordering the killing of hundreds of protesters in February. He and his two sons pleaded not guilty in their first court appearance. Outside, riot police kept pro- and anti-Mubarak demonstrators apart. The opening of the historic trial was all broadcast live on state-run television. The case was adjourned until the middle of August. The BBC's Cairo correspondent John Lyne was at the courthouse.
Outside the court at the police academy in Cairo, angry crowds. They simply don't believe Hosni Mubarak is really going to face justice. But the arrival of a helicopter and an ambulance begin to suggest the former president is indeed being brought to the court. Then one by one, they're brought into the cage of the dock. The sons, Gamal and Allah, the former interior minister, eventually Hosni Mubarak himself. He's carried in on a stretcher, but the judge refuses to let him leave the court on grounds of ill health. Then the charges are read.
His intention was to kill as many scores, the biggest number of scores of innocent people.
The former president is finally required to answer for his actions.
You have heard the charges leveled against you by the prosecution. What can you say? What's your response? All these accusations, I deny them all.
So what could be a long and complex trial has finally begun. This is a moment Egyptians surely never believed they would ever see. Their former president, members of his family and his officials, all in the dock, what used to be the Mubarak Police Academy. And its implications are going to be felt right across the Middle East. Opposition supporters here in Cairo are certainly delighted.
When I saw him today, I felt it's the very first step to a long way to justice.
It's not like they are happy because of what happening to him. They are happy that justice came in this country one day.
So the question is, will this now heal or just reopen Egypt's wounds? John Lyne, BBC News, Cairo.
Well, Gaddafi in Libya, Ben Ali in Tunisia, intense pressures on President Assad at this moment in Syria. Now Mubarak visible behind those bars in a Cairo courtroom. What is the impact in the Arab world? My question to the BBC's Arab Affairs analyst, Rami Rahim.
The symbolic impact is huge. Obviously, as has been mentioned, the first time an Arab people bringing their leader to trial. Saddam Hussein is not to be compared to this case, obviously, because it was not the people of Iraq who brought him to trial. But that's on the symbolic side of things. Practically, in the short and medium term, it's not very easy to imagine an immediate impact on other Arab countries, especially because 8 months into this wave of uprisings sweeping the Arab world, we are much more aware of the differences between individual Arab countries than we were on January the 14th, when there was another symbolic moment when a Tunisian president boarded a plane and fled to Saudi Arabia. That was a hugely symbolic moment, but it also had an immediate impact on the ground in terms of people in many Arab countries thinking the Tunisian people have found a way to be empowered all of a sudden, and there is so much in common between us and them. Entrenched leaders, unpopular, in power for so long. It was the same situation. Now each country is on a very different track. So in terms of short-term or even medium-term impact, not much. Symbolically, historically, it's a huge moment.
Our Arab Affairs analyst Rami Rahim there talking to me from Bush House. Well, our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins now reflects on how President Mubarak, former President Mubarak's long career is viewed now.
For Hosni Mubarak, the rise to the summit of world politics, courted by American presidents as a symbol of Arab stability, is more than matched by the speed and depth of his fall, forced out by popular anger, ending up in a caged dock. Hosni Mubarak was thrust into Egypt's presidency in October 1981 when Anwar Sadat was assassinated beside him. Stability became the obsession at the expense of all political opposition. President Mubarak stuck with his predecessor's peace treaty with Israel made at Camp David, although it was very unpopular in Egypt. He put thousands of Islamists behind bars, many without trial, and many were tortured. But when extremists massacred 58 tourists at Luxor in 1997, President Mubarak stepped up the fight against them and contained them. To the White House, he often seemed an indispensable ally, a beacon of stability well worth supporting with billions of dollars in aid. But in Egypt itself, his whole regime became associated with corruption and brutality. And after 30 years in power, it took only 18 days of immense popular anger, most powerfully expressed in Tahrir Square, to bring him down and set him on the road to trial. So Egypt's ex-president has become the big political casualty of the Arab Spring. His downfall watched closely now by nervous leaders across the region. James Robbins, BBC News.
Well, what was it like inside the courtroom with Mubarak there on a stretcher? Live now to Cairo, to our World Affairs editor, John Simpson. John, you were one of the very few journalists inside that courtroom at what was the Mubarak Police Academy. What was it like?
Quite extraordinary, Nick. Quite extraordinary. Unforgettable. I mean, I've seen various big headline trials in my time, Saddam Hussein, for instance, but this was completely different. This was the destruction of a figure who had been in power for 30 years, who many people here, the newspapers in particular, egging them on, thought would never actually appear in court, that a deal would be done or he'd refuse to come or something. But then suddenly we saw him being brought in on a bed, and that somehow created an extraordinary feeling in the court. There was absolute silence for an instant or two, and then a really sharp intake of breath. And we watched as one of ex-President Mubarak's sons bent down, was also in the dock, bent down and kissed his father, and that too had a tremendous effect on the way that people were watching and feeling that, yes, now they really do believe that he's gone. It's not just a trick, it's not just a conspiracy, it's happened.
It is the end of the Mubarak era when it comes to the president himself, flown in from Sharm el-Sheikh. But what's your sense in Cairo at this moment as to how much the Mubarak institutions are still there under the surface?
Well, they're all there. I mean, he was being tried at the Mubarak Police Academy. They've tried to get rid of the lettering that says Mubarak over the main gate, but it's still there. The 3 judges who were there were all appointed under President Mubarak, if not actually by him. The chief prosecutor in the case was appointed certainly under him and perhaps by him. And so there's an entire system here which over 30 years he's created, nurtured, and made sure served his purposes. And suddenly all these figures are now turning round, and when he looks out from the dock at his judges, he knows that they were his men originally.
Another extraordinary day in the Arab Spring. Our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, live from Cairo. John, thanks for joining us here on The Hub.